The following is a presentation of New Worker Radio. The views and opinions expressed therein do not necessarily represent those of WZML, its staff, or management.
Hello, and welcome to New Worker News on WZML 92.9. My name is Manolis, bringing you national and international updates from a worker's perspective.
This past March 8th marked International Working Women's Day. While there is much to celebrate on the contributions of women to the labor and communist movement, the reality that women in the United States face exposes the necessity for the emancipation of the other half of our class. It's no secret that women have a harder time in our society than men. They receive lower wages, have worse jobs, and smaller pensions. The education and training system itself is designed to create inequality. Furthermore, women bear the greater share of unpaid labor, reproductive work, especially in the household, in childcare, and in family care for the elderly or sick. Patriarchal structures and hierarchies prevail, characterized by discrimination, sexism, and violence. We would like to emphasize this with some data from the United States. The gender pay gap in the U.S. is over 25%, significantly above the EU average. After retirement, things get worse. On average, a woman receives 30% less in retirement than a man, and 11% of female retirees live below the poverty line. Women do a larger share of the housework and of childcare. 43% of women in the U.S. have experienced discrimination at work. More than 1 in 6 women have experienced sexual assault. More than 1 in 4 college-age women have also experienced sexual assault. More than 1 in 3 women have experienced rape, physical violence, or stalking. The conviction rate for perpetrators is very low, with 1 in 5 cases being dismissed and only 2.5% of perpetrators being incarcerated. According to the World Bank, the U.S. ranks 34th worldwide for the intentional murder of females. The scarcely available data shows that killings of women in the U.S. is a silent epidemic, with the numbers rising each year. In 2019, nearly 3,000 women were killed, and in 2021, with the most available data, an estimated 4,970 women were killed. This is the reality in the U.S., a highly developed country. As communists, we know only too well that all of this is no coincidence, but a result of the development of class society. Capitalism is dependent on exploiting women in particular, and keeping them in a special state of oppression. Therefore, resistance to the prevailing conditions and a consistent struggle for the improvement of women's situation and rights are necessary. The emancipatory movement has achieved much in this regard, but the capitalist system of rule prevents complete gender equality. Therefore, the struggle for the complete liberation of women is a necessary part of the revolutionary struggle for socialism, which must be waged equally by women and men of the working class. Accordingly, the Communist Workers' Platform has stated in its statutes in Article 10, the recruitment of women from the working class and other popular strata to the party must be the permanent concern of party members. All the party organizations must develop permanent and stable activity for the rights, equality, and emancipation of women, and their participation in the social and political struggles. In this context, it goes without saying that we distance ourselves from bourgeois feminism. Our concern is not how many CEOs of the largest banks and corporations are female, nor are we interested in how many women are members of the bourgeois federal government, or whether women can pursue a so-called career in the armed forces. It is not class-neutral general women's interests that we would represent, detached from the social and property issues of capitalism. We know that the complete liberation of women and gender equality requires the realization of socialism and communism. Therefore, we follow the motto, the fight for women's liberation is the class struggle. In other national news, a new report by Columbia University and the anti-poverty organization Robin Hood Foundation paints a very frightening picture. 1 in 4 New York City residents live in extreme poverty. The city's poverty rate is almost twice the U.S. average, which is already a rather disappointing one. The study, based on 13 years of research with over 3,000 households, shows that the poverty rate in the metropolis of the U.S. has increased by 7 percentage points within just 2 years. The situation is particularly alarming for children. 420,000 of them, approximately 26% of all children in the city, are growing up in poverty. The study also shows that Black, Hispanic, and Asian communities are twice as affected by poverty as white populations. This inequality points to deeply rooted capitalist structures that exacerbate poverty and impede access to resources. The drastic increase in poverty is closely linked to the decline in government support measures. With the end of the pandemic aid and cuts in social benefits, more and more people are facing existential hardship. Many households are struggling with unaffordable rents, a lack of medical care, and increasing food insecurity. Instead of taking measures to combat poverty, policymakers are increasingly focused on supporting large corporations and military expansion. While food aid and housing subsidies are being cut, rents are rising to record levels, driving thousands into homelessness. The developments in New York are exemplary of a global crisis of capitalism that can also be observed in other metropolises such as Paris, London, and Berlin. Poverty, housing shortages, and social exclusion are not inevitable laws of nature, but are the result of an economic system that prioritizes profits over people. That is, a system of capitalism. The only solution lies in the organization and collective resistance of the working class. Only through solidarity can a fair system be created that guarantees social security and decent living conditions for all. In international news, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, has published new data on the global proliferation of weapons. The report highlights that ongoing imperialist rivalries, particularly between the U.S. and China, have led to a massive arms buildup. A central focus is on the war in Ukraine, but also on other international conflicts. According to the new figures, Ukraine became the world's largest importer of heavy weapons between 2020 and 2024. Compared to the previous period, from 2015 to 2019, its arms imports increased nearly 100-fold. Overall, European arms imports also increased by 155%. The U.S. further expanded its share of global arms exports and now controls 43% of the market. In contrast, Russia's arms exports fell by 64%. The shifts in the global arms market reflect the geopolitical developments of recent years. While the U.S. has massively increased its exports to Europe, Russia's exports have primarily been to India, China, and Kazakhstan. France has also significantly expanded its arms sales, becoming the world's second largest arms exporter. This was primarily due to extensive arms deliveries to European countries including Greece, Croatia, and Ukraine. NATO countries have more than doubled their combined arms imports. Particularly noteworthy is that for the first time in 2 decades, the largest share of U.S. arms exports went to Europe, not the Middle East. Nevertheless, Saudi Arabia remains the largest single buyer of American weapons. Arms imports have also increased significantly in West Africa, with Nigeria as the main buyer. In addition, countries such as Burkina Faso, Mali, and Senegal are also increasing their military buildup. Global militarization also affects technological advances in the arms industry. According to SIPRI, combat aircraft remain the primary weapon for long-range attacks. At the same time, interest in long-range cruise missiles is growing, with the U.S. exporting almost half of all systems of this type traded worldwide. Global rearmament and militarization are direct consequences of the capitalist crisis and the imperialist competition for markets, resources, and spheres of influence. Profits of the arms industry are rising rapidly, while even larger parts of the world are plunged into conflict. The constant escalation of these conflicts does not serve to protect peoples, but solely to secure imperialist interests. While billions are being spent on armaments, the social conditions of the working class are deteriorating. In Austria, for example, military spending is rising dramatically, while at the same time cuts to social services are being discussed, a move confirmed by the announcements. This clearly shows that governments are prepared to dig deeper into their pockets for war and armaments, while at the same time claiming there is no money for healthcare or social security. This was also made very clear by the designated Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany, Friedrich Merz, of the CDU, with his so-called whatever it takes announcement, and even further with the announcement of Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, for the Rearm Europe plan, which, if adopted, will allocate 800 billion euros to defense spending across the 27 member states. The SIPRI report clearly shows that arms buildup continues unabated in many parts of the world. While some states are supposedly reducing their military dependence on Russia, the United States and its allies are increasingly dominating the global arms market. Geopolitical tensions and ongoing conflicts suggest that this trend will continue in the coming years. This madness can only be broken if the working class of each country focuses on its own interest and opposes capitalist militarism. The path to peace lies not in supporting imperialist alliances, but in abolishing the system that produces these wars. In more international news, we'll now take a look at what's happening in Syria. The political landscape in Syria has changed dramatically in recent months. After years of war and Russian support for the Assad government, the jihadist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, has unexpectedly seized power. HTS, which emerged from the al-Qaeda offshoot al-Nusra Front, gained control of large parts of the country in December without encountering any significant resistance. Former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad was forced to leave the airbase on December 8th and is currently in Moscow. First, we will look at Russia's role in the Syrian power transition, which had supported the Syrian government since the beginning of the so-called Arab Spring. This time, it did not intervene, despite having considerable military resources in Syria. Despite the weakening of the Russian army due to the war in Ukraine, Moscow could have easily attacked the HTS militias, which moved in open convoys on the streets from the air. But Russia chose to accept the change of power. This raises questions about Moscow's strategic interest in the region. Although HTS has taken control of certain areas of Syria, it faces enormous challenges. The Israeli army has established a stronghold in rural areas around Damascus and the east of Euphrates. The U.S. and Israeli-backed Syrian Democratic Forces are waiting to see how their relations with the new central government will develop, but have also expressed their willingness to cooperate with Israel. Although the HTS government has been cautiously welcomed by Western countries, key regional players such as Qatar and Saudi Arabia have so far withheld financial support. This has created an unexpected opportunity for Russia to reassert its influence in Syria. Following the takeover, there was a bloody escalation. According to activists, more than 1,000 people have been killed in massacres and clashes in the new escalation in Syria. Security forces of the transitional government killed or executed 745 people, which was reported to the London-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. Among the victims were women and children. In addition to the civilians, 273 combatants on both sides were also killed. The UK-based observatory reported massacres in more than 20 locations in Latakia, Tartus, and Hama governorates, western coastal regions considered strongholds of the Alawites, a religious community to which ousted President Bashar al-Assad also belongs. Groups like HTS consider the Alawites to be outlaws. The observatory accused fighters of the Islamist interim government of war crimes. Numerous residents of the coastal region said that thousands of Alawites and Christians had fled their homes since Thursday, fearing for their lives. Several hundred people, primarily women, children, and the elderly, sought refuge at a Russian military base in Syria. These reports, unfortunately, could not be independently verified. Interim President Ahmed Shara addressed the population, saying that remnants of the ousted former government had attempted to test the new Syria with attacks. Shara praised the response of the security forces and called on the attackers to lay down their weapons. He did not mention reports of massacres. Intelligence Chief Anas Khattab called on his own fighters to exercise restraint and demanded that all forces involved submit to the military commanders. Meanwhile, Russia has taken advantage of the uncertainty in the region to strengthen its relations with the HTS government. Moscow provided the new government with much-needed financial support in the form of $23 million in local currency printed in Russia. This gesture underscores the strategic partnership between the two countries and demonstrates Russia's willingness to work with the new government to safeguard its interests in Syria. An important aspect of this partnership is the use of Russian military facilities in Syria, particularly the naval base in Tartus and the air base in Khmeim. Discussions are also underway regarding the exploration of natural gas deposits in the Mediterranean and the construction of industrial facilities in Homs and Palmyra. Russia could also benefit from the privatization of state-owned enterprises. These projects could significantly expand Russia's economic and strategic influence in the region. Now, we will look at the role of the U.S. and regional dynamics.
We'll be right back with more of New Worker News here on 92.9 FM WZML. But I want to remind you that every day throughout this country, workers are subjected to injustices and humiliation at the hands of the capitalists, from unpaid wages to mass layoffs. So we at New Worker understand the tyranny that the workplace is for workers. This is why we fight to expose these injustices. Only through militant organization of the working class can we stand toe-to-toe against the bosses. So this is why we want to hear from you, the listener. Are you having issues at work? Bosses cutting your hours or wages? Are you or your fellow workers' safety being thrown out of the window in the name of ever-increasing profit? Well, you are not alone. So reach out to us to tell your story. You can anonymously send an email or even a voice memo to cwpusa@protonmail.com. Again, that is cwpusa@protonmail.com. And check us out online at newworker.us. And now back to New Worker Radio, only here on 92.9 FM WZML.
The U.S. stance under the Trump administration remains chaotic. While Trump has taken surprising steps towards rapprochement with Russia in Ukraine, his administration has yet to take any concrete action regarding Syria. There is speculation that behind-the-scenes negotiations are taking place between the U.S. and Russia regarding the future of Ukraine and Syria. This uncertainty gives Russia additional room to strengthen its position in Syria. The HTS government has announced plans to open Syria's natural resources and state assets to foreign investment. This could open up new opportunities for Russian companies, particularly in the energy and infrastructure sectors. The fact that Qatar and Saudi Arabia are withholding financial support could help Russia assume a dominant role in the Syrian economy. The cooperation between Russia and the HTS government marks a new phase in the Syrian conflict. While Russia seeks to secure its military and economic presence in the region, HTS faces the challenge of maintaining control over the devastated country and gaining international recognition. It is more likely that Syria will be fragmented into different spheres of influence. This is already becoming apparent. Parts of Syria are under Turkish control. Others are occupied by the U.S. in cooperation with the SDF, and Israel is also trying to gain control of parts of Syria. In other news, in the conflict in the Middle East, the U.S. has launched a series of airstrikes against targets in Yemen on Sunday, March 16th. The attack is directed against the Houthis, who recently imposed a ban on Israeli shipping in the region. President Trump justified the military action with the need to protect international shipping and called it a, quote, decisive and strong military action against the Houthi terrorists, end quote. A senior U.S. official told the Israeli newspaper Jerusalem Post that the attacks were not only aimed at the Houthis, but also a message to Iran. Trump demanded in a statement that Tehran immediately end its support for the Houthis. Iranian foreign minister also threatened President Donald Trump, who called on his country to end its support for the Houthis, saying, "Stop supporting Israeli genocide and terrorism. Stop killing the Yemeni people." In a message shared on his social media account, the foreign minister said, "The U.S. government has no authority or duty to dictate Iran's foreign policy. That era ended in 1979. Last year, Biden was duped into giving the genocidal regime, Israel, an unprecedented $23 billion. More than 60,000 Palestinians have been killed, and the world holds the United States fully responsible." Abbas Agraki called on the U.S. to end attacks on the Houthis in Yemen. "Stop supporting genocide and terrorism. Stop killing the Yemeni people." The attacks, which could have lasted several days or even weeks, targeted Houthi positions in the capital Sana'a and the provinces of Sada and Al-Baida. The Yemeni Ministry of Health has so far reported 53 deaths and over 100 injuries, including civilians, women, and children. The conflict has escalated in recent months after the Houthis, in response to the Israeli blockade of the Gaza Strip, banned Israeli ships from passing through the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and the Bab al-Mandeb Strait. The US and UK accused the Houthis of destabilizing global shipping with their attacks on merchant vessels. Meanwhile, a Houthi spokesman warned that the US and UK attacks on Yemen represented a return to the militarization of the Red Sea. The Houthis emphasized that their blockade only affected Israeli ships and would only be lifted when humanitarian aid could flow unhindered into the Gaza Strip. The measures were imposed only in response to the starvation of 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, in response to war crimes and a crime against humanity. The U.S. military intervention is causing international concern. Russia, through Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, called for an immediate end to the violence and for diplomatic solutions. Meanwhile, the close cooperation between the U.S. and Israel is becoming increasingly clear. Tel Aviv was reportedly informed of the attacks in advance. The escalation in Yemen could have far-reaching consequences for the region, which is already increasingly becoming a powder keg. While the U.S. reaffirms its position in the Middle East, critics warn of a further conflagration that could also draw Iran into the conflict.
You've been listening to New Worker News on 92.9 FM WZML, your home for local, national, and international news, all from a working class perspective. New Worker News is the official organ of the Communist Workers Platform. If you're a worker, we would like to hear from you. You can reach us at cwpusa@protonmail.com. Again, that's cwpusa@protonmail.com. If you would like more news from a worker's point of view, visit us at newworker.us. You can find weekly articles on events happening all over the country and internationally. If you've enjoyed the program and wish to see more working class reporting, consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/New Worker. And thank you for listening to New Worker News on 92.9 FM WZML.